supply. Oh, and Chris previously served as the head of Build Baton Rouge. He's a tenured law professor, former Senate staffer, practicing attorney, and accomplished scholar in local government and urban development, and also one of the three organizations that leads the Neighborhood Homes Coalition. And then rounding out the coalition co-chairs is Matt Joseph, Senior Vice President for Policy at LISC, who will break down how this proposal will work. Matt previously spent 13 years at U.S. Treasury's CDFI fund, including as manager of the New Markets Tax Credit Program. So he really understands how these tax credit programs work. And he also served on the staff of the Senate Banking Committee and worked at HUD. And then we will hear from Zach Amos, who's the Associate Director of Advocacy and Public Policy at Habitat for Humanity of Greater Memphis. Zach leads advocacy efforts at the local and state level to expand access to affordable housing, and he's been instrumental in policy changes like reforming Memphis Light, Gas, and Water's Eco-Build program. And he brings a background in coalition building and legislative strategy and a focus on public and private efforts to support sustainable housing policy. So we're very happy to have Zach's developer perspective. And then we'll hear from Jacques Logan, who's the Senior Vice President of New Business Initiatives at the National Equity Fund, where he leads the development of new business lines, including missing middle rental housing, agency lending, renewable energy products, and strategic equity investments. He joined NEF in 2011 after working in LIHTC development, asset management, and year 15 transactions. And this, again, is going to bring that investor perspective of how a new tax credit would work. And closing us will be Brian, who's a partner at Porterfield, Fettig, and Sears, who's bringing over a decade of experience working on Capitol Hill, and his policy expertise spans housing finance, tax, bank regulation, consumer protection. He advises numerous clients and has been working closely with us to advance the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. So thank you to all of our speakers. And with that, we're going to kick off with a video clip from Senator Young. And I think, yeah, we'll pause here and switch screens for a second for sound.
Hello, I'm Senator Todd Young. It's great to join you to share a few words. I recently reintroduced the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act with Senator Mark Warner of Virginia to revitalize housing in distressed neighborhoods across the country. In today's housing market, it's too expensive to renovate or build a home in many urban and rural neighborhoods because the cost of construction exceeds the value of the property when it's sold. That math simply doesn't work for private developers, so these areas get left behind. Our legislation changes that. It creates a targeted federal tax credit that fills the cost gap only after a home is completed and sold to a qualified homeowner. That means the risk is on the investor, not the taxpayer, and the credit directly supports revitalization. This legislation also ensures affordability. Homes must be sold to buyers making less than 140% of area median income, and only neighborhoods with high poverty and low property values are eligible. On top of that, state housing agencies will distribute these credits through a competitive process with annual limits to keep the program efficient and focused. That's a smart, accountable investment that can stabilize neighborhoods, support existing homeowners, and expand affordable housing, all without displacing the communities it's meant to help. I encourage all of you, advocates, community leaders, and concerned citizens, to join us in urging the Senate to pass this important bill. Together, we can help restore neighborhoods and provide the stable, affordable housing every family deserves.
All right. So that was our Senate Republican lead, Senator Young, sending his message on. And we're continuing to work closely with that office as the Senate's considering their version of the reconciliation bill. With that, we are going to turn it over to Chris to share a brief presentation on why this policy is so important. Chris?
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. I think Senator Young framed this perfectly. And I would add to that by sharing a bit of my own experience. As Sarah mentioned, I previously was the head of Baton Rouge's redevelopment authority, Build Baton Rouge. And in that role, I was responsible for devising strategies and implementing strategies to address the city's most challenged and disinvested neighborhoods. What I found is that when we find neighborhoods where there's concentrated blight, abandonment of property, there are opportunities. And as Senator Young mentioned, standing in the way of communities realizing those opportunities are simple real estate development economics. In many of these communities, it simply costs more to rehabilitate and bring those properties or build new properties and bring them to market. New single family homes that can meet the needs of families who are increasingly squeezed out of our unaffordable market for single family home ownership. Solving that valuation gap, if you will, is key to unlocking not only opportunity for families aspiring to affordable home ownership, but also communities looking for strategies to help them stabilize their neighborhoods and grow their own property values while increasing their quality of life. The data shows that we are in a period of declining supply and a growing home ownership gap. And that is most acutely felt in traditionally underserved communities, communities like the ones I served when I led Build Baton Rouge, and communities like the ones our partners through NCST throughout the country are working hard in. And so the NHIA, the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, is designed specifically to address these gaps by making development financially feasible in disinvested areas. As somebody who's worked on the front lines of this problem, I know how critical the need is in communities like Baton Rouge and others around the country. We do not have to tolerate this level of disinvestment and lack of opportunity for families aspiring to affordable home ownership. We have a solution, and our goal now is to get it across the finish line and rally support through our networks and with our representatives in Congress to make this a reality. Sarah?
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. And we've definitely seen the, I think, national need for this proposal grow since it's been proposed. And the proposal has evolved to reflect that as well, which Matt's going to now break down how neighborhood homes would work. And Matt, I'm just going to let you know we already have a question that I know you'll answer in your presentation, but we got a question on what's considered high poverty areas. So you'll kind of break down some of the geographic targeting for folks.
I will. Thank you. Yes, we definitely get into that. If there's a follow-up question, we can address it then. So yeah, let's get right into the meat of the legislation. It's called the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, and it creates a tax credit that'll spur the development and rehabilitation of homes for home ownership in communities that really do struggle to attract these investments, as Chris was talking about. In the Senate, the bill number is S1686. And it was introduced on May 8th. Senator Young, we just heard from, and his partner in crime is Senator Warner, the Democrat from Virginia. We had 6 original co-sponsors on the legislation, as you can see, paired evenly with Republicans and Democrats, and some pretty good geographic coverage there as well. The House counterpart was introduced back in April by Representative Kelly, who's actually the chairman of the Ways and Means Subcommittee that oversees tax and revenue, and Congressman Larson from Connecticut. And we're already up to 40 co-sponsors, bipartisan co-sponsors from 21 different states on that legislation. And I should also share that the variation of the legislation that was introduced the last session of Congress had, I think, about 110 co-sponsors in the House. So there's still a lot of room for growth here. But remember, these legislation, it was just introduced within the last couple of months. So we're just at the beginning stages of collecting co-sponsors. And we'll hear more on what we can do further on that front later. All right, Kelly, next slide. So what are these? These are federal tax credits, but they're allocated to the states. So those that are familiar with the low-income housing tax credit program are familiar with this model. They're allocated by formula, and it's a $9 per capita with a minimum allocation of $12 million. And there's 8 states plus DC, the territories that will get that $12 million minimum. Everyone else gets $9 per capita. So all told, across the country, that's about $3 billion a year, and that would be adjusted for inflation with each year. The states select which agencies will allocate the credits, but we imagine in most instances it will be the state's housing finance agencies, which are the groups that allocate the low-income housing tax credits. Next slide. So the states write allocation plans. So the statute tells them what criteria they need to consider, but they have a lot of flexibility beyond that. At a minimum, they have to address, well, what is the need in the neighborhood? What is the impact of the proposal on stability and revitalization and the neighborhood residents? What's the capability of the applicant, the track record? What is the likely end result for the long-term ownership of the assets in the communities? And any other criteria the states puts on. States also set standards for construction costs, quality, inspections, and fees, etc. And so they'll make allocations to what we're calling neighborhood home sponsors. And those might be developers, investors, lenders. They would be the ones applying to these states for the allocations. And if they are successful, they have 5 years to raise equity from investors and build and rehab the homes. And any allocations they don't use within the 5 years are returned to the agency and they can be reallocated. Next slide. Okay, this gets to the question and a little bit of what the senator was talking about. There is some flexibility, but all states are required to ensure that no less than 60% of the allocations are invested in distressed communities, under-resourced communities, what have you, but they're communities with a poverty rate at least 30% higher than the area poverty rate, median family income less than 80% of the area median family income, and, so this is an and test, got to meet all three, the home value is less than 100% of the area median home value. So it's high poverty, it's low income, and low home value communities. So every state, at least 60% of the investments have to go to those distressed markets. Up to 20% can be provided to certain other markets specified in the statute. And these include rural communities that may have lower income, but might not meet the other 2 criteria. It includes owner-occupied rehabs if it is in a gentrifying census tract, so that the homeowners there can afford to stay in the community. And also communities impacted by natural disaster. So maybe the communities in this bucket don't meet all 3 criteria, but they meet one of these. The state can decide to allocate up to 20% there. And then there's a total wild card for the state. Up to 20% allocations wherever they identify through a methodology that the state's having a lack of affordable single-family homes, they can target some of the investments to. And if you're a small state, one of those 8 states I mentioned earlier that's getting the state minimum of $12 million, then they have more flexibility, can go up to 40% in either of these 2 categories. So they have flexibility within those categories. Next question, next slide. So what types of homes? It's they're single family homes, but they can be manufactured or stick built. It can be owner occupied with up to 4 units. So as long as the owner is living in one of the units, that qualifies. They can be condo units, cooperative housing, development types, new construction for sale, substantial rehab, maybe a vacant property infill for new sale, but also owner occupied rehabs. Next slide. How about the homeowners? The homes must be sold to homeowners with income not greater than 140% of the area median. So, you know, it's for lower, middle, moderate income homeowners, a range of homeowners. If a state wants to target it in these kind of non-distressed communities, the ones that they say lack affordable single-family homes, then the threshold's lowered to 120%. So that's kind of like the balance. If they want to go outside of the distressed communities, they have to kind of target it to the lower end of the spectrum of the eligible homeowners. The maximum home price cannot exceed 4 times the area median family income. So we're capping the sales price. So for example, if you have an MFI that's $90,000 in the community, that would mean the maximum homeowner income is $126,000, and the home price would be $360,000 in that community. And I mentioned you can use this both for new sale, new for purchase, or for existing homeowners that want to rehab their homes. And in that instance, the homeowner has to have an income below 100% of MFI. So the homeowner rehab is really targeted toward the lower income spectrum. Next slide. So how much is the credit that you can claim on these homes? So if it's a new construction, substantial rehabilitation for for sale homes, so I'm talking about that category of for sale homes, it covers the gap between the development costs and the net sales price. So it only covers that specific gap. And it's capped as well within that. So it's going to be capped at the lesser of the total development costs, or 80% of the national median sales price for a new home. So for example, right now in 2024, the national median sales price was about $420,000. So we're saying your total development costs that are eligible for the credit in this instance would be 80% of that 420,000. So $360,000 of development costs you can incur, and with the credit, you can only get 40% of that in the form of your credit. So the maximum anyone could ever claim with the 2024 figures is $144,000 of a tax credit. Next slide. Okay, and here's an example. So in this example, the land acquisition, construction costs, everything added up to $320,000 in the development costs. And by the way, that includes the developer fee. So the developer is getting paid and being made whole there. And suppose they sell the home for $260,000. Well, that leaves a cap of $60,000. Now remember, the national maximum one you can get is $144,000, like we talked about on the last slide. But it's the lesser of that, or the 40% of the development cost, which in this case was $128,000. But you remember the first thing I said was you can only do it up to the actual gap. So in this case, the developer is only getting the $60,000. That's why this program is so efficient and effective, because the credits claimed after the home is sold. So we know exactly what that gap is and what the developers and investors are entitled to. In this case, $60,000. Next slide. Okay, for an owner-occupied home, for rehabs, the credit's worth 50% of the eligible costs. So not 40% as in a new for sale, but 50%. And that's capped at $50,000, which essentially means the most you can put in is $100,000. You get the 50% credit, so you get a $50,000 credit. You have to put at least $25,000 of rehab into the costs. So how we see this one working in this example is if there's a $60,000 rehab cost, basically the tax credit is used to do a borrower discount or maybe a forgivable grant kind of thing, and they'll maybe have to borrow $30,000 from the bank to get this. So that's kind of a blended kind of product. And next slide. All right, so this is a couple points I want to bring up again. The federal benefits, they only accrue after the successful completion of a project. So only after each home is renovated, sold, or the renovations are complete can the credit be claimed. They're done on a rolling basis. So unlike other credits, there's not really a lengthy time period when the investments must be held in the project, nor is there really a recapture event here. So I think that'll be really attractive to investors. But if the home does sell within 5 years of the purchase, it's the homeowner who must then pay a percentage of the gain back to the state. So it can be reinvested in this kind of program. Next slide. So I just want to summarize some of the key points again. What this is really a tax credit administered by states to spur the development of modest homes in under-resourced communities without displacing current residents. And some of the checks and balances we have, again, 60% of the investments must be made in these kind of distressed communities, with additional flexibility for rural communities, natural disasters, and other communities struggling to attract these investments. It's very modest home prices. The sale price is limited to 4 times the median family income. The homeowners are lower, middle, moderate income homeowners. The tax credits are limited to 80% of a national median home price. So there is a limitation on how many credits you can claim. And again, only up to that actual gap. And then as part of the selection criteria, states do have to consider impact on existing residents. So they're really, the whole issues of displacement should be kind of solved through that selection process. So what are the outcomes over 10 years? We estimate 500,000 homes that will be built or substantially rehabilitated, 151 billion in development activity, over 1 million jobs, 102 billion in wages, and 45.6 billion in federal, state, and local tax revenues and fees. That's in addition to obvious reduction of blight and vacant properties in the aging urban and rural communities, or attracting new homes in rural communities where you're trying to also attract jobs, and the homeownership opportunities for a wide range of families. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. We have some technical questions, so I think let's answer some of them now just to help clarify. So one of them was, does this specifically target home ownership? And Matt definitely emphasized that. And for our listeners, I think we really view this as building off of the successful model of the low-income housing tax credit program, which targets rental affordable housing. And this is filling the unmet need about affordable home ownership supply for owner occupants. So that's that. There was a question of, are tax exempt nonprofit housing organizations able to participate? And I think our answer here is absolutely. They could be the builders pursuing this credit to complete this work. But Matt, I don't know if you want to add on to that at all.
Yeah, 100%. That's right. That's just like it is with the housing credit. Nonprofit developers often come in, but they will find investors that essentially purchase the credits, and that's how they get the capital for the projects.
Great. And then there are two questions I'm going to combine about, could this program be used in conjunction with other public and private funding sources? And someone asked specifically about new markets.
Yeah, certainly there's no limitations in the statute about combining this with other sources of funding. So absolutely, new markets, probably so. Probably so. Again, there's no limitations in the legislation about that.
Yeah, and as new markets we see folks using it creatively for some home ownership, all these things, as often is the case, there's no silver bullet, and these things often have to be paired. We really view neighborhood homes as, again, helping close some of that gap financing to make this affordable home ownership supply actually affordable too. Okay, great. Let's see, how will this compare to the complexity of administering new markets and LIHTC? Well, what I often like to say to people, Matt, is that LIHTC, when it was initially enacted, did not look or operate the way it does today. And it takes years for these programs to, really mature. But overall, it's built on a similar model. However, over time, there are quite detailed qualified allocation plans. And I think to a degree, this would be simpler at the start. But what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I agree. I think that and maybe Jacques will also address this as he talks about the investor perspective, but it is a much shorter time horizon with these credits. So there's not a lengthy, like there's with LIHTC, like a 15-year compliance period that comes with them. I do think this is more of a prospective thing, almost like a new markets for folks that apply for that. You're kind of saying, what am I going to prospectively do with these credits? So I think it'll be easier once folks get used to the program.
Right. There are a lot more questions coming in, but why don't we turn to Zach, and then we'll circle back at the end too. Thank you so much, Matt.
Yep.
So Zach, you're gonna share a little bit of a developer perspective and how you think about this potential new tool.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So yes, my name is Zach Amos. I'm the Associate Director of Advocacy and Public Policy at Habitat Memphis. We have been building in Memphis as an organization for over 40 years now, and we are one of the largest Habitat affiliates in the country. For those who don't know, Habitat's affordability model is really based on a 0% interest mortgage. So we build our homes and sell them at the appraised sales price. There is just no interest on that mortgage. We calculate that it saves our home buyers about $200,000 over the life of that mortgage. In Memphis, we typically build in historically disinvested neighborhoods. We will build on infill lots and occasionally in planned developments as well. The land costs in these areas tend to be significantly cheaper. But the real reason that we build in these areas is because we believe that these communities and the people that live there are worth the investment. A former mayor of Memphis would often say that the city had around 30,000 developable lots, a lot of them in some of these neighborhoods. And he would often get frustrated that developers just wouldn't build there. But one of the biggest reasons really why this didn't happen was because of appraisal gaps. Last year, we here at Habitat Memphis built 30 homes in Shelby County, the county that Memphis is in. And our average appraisal gap was about $30,000 on every home. Um, all of that is to say, we could be building a lot more in these areas, but these gaps really hold us back. Oftentimes, we are really the only builders in these neighborhoods, and our homes provide stability and economic security for our families and their immediate community. They almost always appraise lower than similar homes elsewhere in the county. And another part of this too is they also appreciate in value more slowly over time. And so when reappraisals come around, families miss out on wealth building that folks in other neighborhoods are having. And we built 30 homes last year, but that is not really enough to shift the overall trajectory of these neighborhoods because there's simply not enough new construction because of this gap. These areas fall into something that I call the appraisal trap. Um, Lower land values and property values and blight, they suppress property appraisals, and that sort of stagnation drives school closures, businesses up and leave. Grocery stores, importantly, do not open in these areas. And that in turn drags down property values. And so it becomes this really the worst kind of chicken or the egg problem for us. Without that significant investment or significant systems change, it really is unreasonable to expect this downward trajectory of these neighborhoods to change. Um, we have been talking about the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act for a really long time. One of our congressmen was a co-sponsor in the previous Congress. Um, and I actually have told folks that if you were to write a bill to help Habitat Memphis solve our problems, I would write this one. Um, this bill could really break that cycle. It provides a tool to close those appraisal gaps and attract broader private and commercial investment, very importantly, at scale. It really signals to the market that these neighborhoods matter. This is where you can build quality housing and you can start a quality business and you can create economic activity in these places that had been forgotten. Um, and I think the last thing I'll say, or I'll say two more things. In Memphis, like many cities, public safety is a top of mind concern. When we talk about the NHIA, we talk about how study after study shows that one of the best ways to reduce crime is to eliminate blight and eliminate vacancy. Vacant lots and blighted properties are where people go when they don't want to be seen. I think simply if we want safer streets and safer cities, we need to build on them. And this bill helps us do that. Um, and another program that we have in addition to our affordable mortgage program is a program called Aging in Place, which is a um, repair program for that is at no cost to low income seniors. And this is a bill. Typically, our repairs average about $15,000. A lot of our funding, um, requires us to not go above that mark. This bill could also help us increase that repair cost by providing this tax credit as an incentive for investors and fundraisers, like Matt was mentioning. Um, when we come into these homes at this day and age, $15,000 is probably going to get you a new roof, and that's maybe it. But one of the most important things that I think almost all of our employees do here at Habitat Memphis is we go on home visits for people who request to be a part of our Aging in Place program. And more often than not, there is more than $15,000 of work that needs to be done on these homes. And this is a bill that could make it possible for those repairs to happen. Um, I think in closing, this bill not just closes the gaps on like a balance sheet, which would obviously be great for us, it really helps close the gap between what our communities are right now and really what they deserve to be. And this is something that we've been supportive of for a very long time. And we think this will help us just build more and build better.
Thanks so much, Zach. All right, next we're going to go to Jacques, who's going to share an investor perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Zach, for sort of bringing the developer's perspective to this. I thought in a few minutes today it'd be nice to sort of touch on what we think the capital market for sale single family homes may be, and then sort of drill in a little bit on the credit and how we're seeing sort of the investor environment react to it. So I'd say, early on when we got involved with this particular bill, from a mission-oriented investor perspective, we sort of immediately recognized that this is an underserved area of the market. I think Zach's comments really sort of highlight that. Certainly there are other capital sources in this market. I think we've heard most of them sort of come up on today's call. New market tax credits being certainly one of them. Some enterprising folks have figured out how to use that credit to drive capital at this type of use. I haven't seen any data on the overall market adoption of that, but certainly that is out there. I think to the question about whether or not this credit can be twinned with a new market credit, certainly I think we want to look at that carefully, as this particular credit is an allocated credit, and so therefore the investor needs to own a large portion of the overall limited partnership to receive the credits, and that might cause some interactions with the new market tax credit that we want to be aware of. I cut my teeth early in my career in the LIHTC space, working on single family home developments that were targeted towards rent to own. So I'm very involved in that and understand that has some complexities to it. At NEF, certainly we see some single family home developments come through the pipeline. We see some urban scattered site infill. So those are certainly happening. But again, I'd sort of lean on the idea that on the outset of those first 15 years, creating that environment to allow tenants or others to purchase those homes has its own complexities. We've seen in our work around this bill some other activities. We've seen state credits. We've seen municipalities sort of take up this type of work. Similar to Zach, we've seen some nonprofits develop on balance sheet pools of capital to begin to deploy in these markets. I think by and large, what we heard in our interviews was there seems to be a lack of uniformity around those particular programs, and that uniformity and also availability of capital may prevent or may cause issues around scalability. So I think those, as we looked out of the capital markets, that's generally what we saw. We earlier this year convened a focus group of investors to examine the bill and examine what was in it and how would this credit particularly work. Sort of as we're about midway through that process now, generally my feelings are we're fairly bullish on this credit, assuming that we can get through the hurdles in Washington. I think personally we saw a number of individuals in these investor focus groups just provide a lot of energy and thoughtfulness around how would banks and syndicators and other capital providers react around that credit, which was personally very encouraging to see that folks are willing to roll up their sleeves and sort of figure out how to make this happen. We see as we went through this that this credit, by and large, is fairly streamlined. Certainly, there are wrinkles that'll have to get ironed out, and as Sarah mentioned, it takes years to sort of bring these programs to fruition. But there was really sort of three key concepts here that really sort of made it appealing from the investor's point of view. The first one is, by and large, there is no recapture here. The way the credit works is once the home is built and it's occupied, from the investor's point of view, there's no more recapture. And so the investor doesn't need to have any sort of longer term monitoring, which will certainly, from a cost basis, certainly help. I think, the LIHTC credit, in contrast, has 15 years of monitoring, and that just sort of affects the cost profile of how that credit works. The other one is monetization. So as soon as that home is occupied by the qualified homeowner, that credit can be used against an investor's tax liability. And that makes it very appealing. There's no long drawn out process. In our models, we model less than a year from start of construction to completion of that project. So it is very appealing credit. It seems to drive sort of similar economics to what we see in the energy space around credits being able to be monetized as soon as an energy facility is put into place. So I think the market is sort of ready for that. Additionally, that if you pull on that energy thread, it sort of leads itself to potentially other investors that are not only CRA motivated investors. So there might be a wider, broader investor market, which I think is certainly helpful. And then lastly, not to get too technical here, but the character of the losses. So in Matt's early example, when you have a gap between total development costs and for sale, there's a loss there, a tax loss. And that tax loss, doing some work with some accounting firms, we've sort of come to understand that is an ordinary tax loss, so which is different than a capital tax loss, and very appealing to investors. So I think on a large basis, we have three kind of streamlined, very attractive pillars of this credit, which not many other credits in my professional career have had just at the very start of the bill. So I think a lot of work to go before the ecosystem is ready for large scale development. But I think early projects, there's a lot of energy to on the fringes to be flexible and see if we can get a few pilot projects across the finish line.
Thanks so much, Jack, for sharing that. It's really helpful to hear. All right. And then before we go to questions, we're going to round it out with Brian, who's going to share next steps on advocacy.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. You can go to the next slide. So we've heard a lot about this beautiful housing bill. The question is, how do we get it included in the one big beautiful bill? As many of you know, the House passed their version of the reconciliation bill, which is also what it's called, right before Memorial Day. The Senate is currently in the process of making changes to the bill, putting their own fingerprints on it. A lot of senators have their own individual priorities. So there's a lot of big picture issues at play with SALT and Medicaid, but obviously we're focused on neighborhood homes. And in a minute, I'll tell you kind of the Senate offices that we've done outreach to and would encourage anyone on this call to help with that effort. As far as timing, a lot of conversations taking place this week. There is a goal to actually have potential draft text out on the tax provisions later this week, probably early next week at the latest. That won't be the final cut, but that draft text is obviously very important. You've heard a lot about the 4th of July deadline. That's a self-imposed deadline. Really, the only deadline that they have to meet is there is an increase in the debt limit included in the reconciliation bill of $4 trillion. That is expected to hit maybe in mid-August, but could move up or back based on federal receipts coming in over the next week or two here. So that's the real deadline. But as far as we're concerned, we've been operating just because they've been putting the pedal to the metal, trying to meet this 4th of July deadline, even if it slips. Next slide. So this is a look at the Senate Finance Committee. This is obviously the committee where the neighborhood homes bill goes through. Our leaders, as you heard at the top of the hour from Senator Young and Senator Warner from Virginia. Other original co-sponsors include Tim Scott from South Carolina and Ron Wyden. I do want to recognize there are a couple committee members off the committee that were also original co-sponsors. That includes Kramer and Tim Kaine and Kuhn and Hyde Smith. But for this exercise, we've really been targeting the finance committee members because they're really kind of in the room on a lot of the tax writing provisions. So you'll notice the highlighted members there. Those are members that have indicated interest. We've had a lot of good from the coalition co-chairs, and many of the coalition members have had meetings with these Senate offices. You'll also notice, and I should have mentioned at the top, Neighborhood Homes has long had strong bipartisan support. For the purposes of reconciliation, it is a partisan exercise. So really the Republicans are the ones with the pen here. So all of our focus over the last few months and certainly the last couple of weeks have really been targeted at Republicans only. And so I just highlight those Senate Republicans for anyone who has relationships on this call with those senators. Please reach out because time is of the essence. Next slide. So the House, as I mentioned, had already passed their version of the bill. Once the Senate finally adopts their version, it'll go back to the House. So the House still is relevant. Obviously, there was the low-income housing tax credit that was included in the House version. We've made the case that that's great on the rental side, as Sarah indicated, but more needs to be done on the homeownership side, and that's why neighborhood homes is essential. And so similarly, the members in bold there are members who have already co-sponsored the legislation in this Congress. As Matt noted, we actually had over 110 co-sponsors in the last Congress. We've really been targeting kind of Ways and Means Committee members for this effort so far this year. The highlighted members are folks that just need a little extra nudge we've had positive conversations with. So staying on track, we can go to questions. Sarah, turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We've got a lot of questions, so we will do our best to get through some of these. So I'm going to start with Zach, and you touched on this a bit, but again, I think to reemphasize from your vantage point, what are the current biggest obstacles to producing affordable, modest homes for homeownership in distressed communities?
Yeah, I mean, generally for any community, it's just going to be the cost of construction that has just increased significantly over the past couple of years. And, not to belabor the point, I mean, it's really these appraisal gaps in these distressed communities. We as a nonprofit builder are able to kind of eat that cost, but we're not going to change these communities just by ourselves. We do need the for-profit developing world in these areas, and I think this is a bill that could really help nonprofit builders be kind of like the first wave of building in a community, kind of reestablish higher appraisals so that the for-profit developers could come in afterwards saying that, hey, there's an opportunity here. So yeah, I mean, put it simply, it really is these appraisal gaps that are caused by a variety of different things that we can't change as developers. But when we build a home and when we build these homes en masse, and you've got homeowners that are more engaged in their children's school, they're more engaged in the community. That can help improve all those other societal factors that affect the appraisals in the first place.
Great, thanks. Next, I have a question for you, Jacques. And again, I feel like you touched on this, but what makes neighborhood homes attractive to private investors compared to other housing finance tools like LIHTC or new markets or even opportunity zones someone was asking about? And then I'll just tack on another related question of, how do you think the credit will price relative to, I think we could explain some of the factors that go into credit pricing. And I imagine this one would be influenced by the same factors that influence LIHTC pricing to a degree, but you want to unpack that a little?
Yeah, a lot there, certainly. So let me sort of tackle that in order. I certainly did touch those sort of those three features around recapture, monetization, and then character of the loss stream that certainly make it appealing. by and large, this credit is designed to accomplish this, where, the LIHTC credit and the new market tax credit and the opportunity zones are not designed to accomplish this. So I think, certainly we benefit from that. I think relative to the other credits that are out there, it really is that 1 year stream around being able to monetize the credit. So as I think we sort of move forward, we've heard this from investors that the CRA market is a crowded market. The plate for investors is relatively full. And so having a credit that is 1 year in nature begins to open the door to begin to bring other investors into this marketplace that otherwise wouldn't have tax liability that they can be certain over, the course of 10 years in the case of a LIHTC deal. So I think that is certainly relative to, the capital market space, an appealing thing as we get further down here. The second question is certainly a little harder around pricing. The answer is I don't know. No one knows. I think a lot of the color needs to be filled in on the lines or filled in relative to the lines that Congress is currently drawing. I would suspect early on the credit will sort of reflect concessionary pricing out of the gate, and sort of the reason is because we're gonna need pilot projects, and it might not be bankable out of the gate. But over time, I expect once we have sort of a history of this being successful, the credit price should begin to sort of rise.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, another question is the Neighborhood Homes Coalition working with state housing agencies to get ready for this? We're very happy that NCSHA is a supporter. But yeah, I think state housing agencies are going to have an important role to play. Matt, I don't know if you want to add on to what we see as some immediate next steps if we're able to get this across the finish line.
Yeah, we've been certainly, and I see Greg from NCSHA is on this call. They've been a great part of the coalition, and they've given us opportunities at their conferences to talk about this program and uplift it. So I think the housing finance agencies are learning more about this and probably keeping more than one eye open on this tax conversations. And I think the moment we get some certainty that this will likely be included in the bill and is going to come across the finish line, I think there'll be a lot of education we need to do to the state agencies. Fortunately, they have the LIHTC model that they can kind of dust from. They know what QAPs are, but it's a little different program. So there's got to be some education. Excuse me.
Yep. Another question, Matt, that I think you and I could tackle is that I thought was interesting. Are there any provisions in the bill to increase density? Why not? And I think this is an interesting question because this bill is really targeting to serve, a range of community types, including really rural and tribal communities, hard to reach communities, distressed communities where candidly density is not the policy goal here. But do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think it's in the urban corridors where it can be used for like infill development. I think we're going to get to some of those goals met. But you're right. It's got to be a tool for rural communities that are having trouble. Maybe around like the main streets, they might be able to build some housing, but a lot of it might have to be some new build to really attract manufacturing jobs that are coming to the communities. So it's really up to the states to kind of figure out how they want to parse out their credits.
Yeah. Zach, what would success look like for your organization in year one of this program? What kinds of projects or outcomes could you imagine?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't say the first goal would be break even on our homes. That would be great for us. I think, one thing that would look like success is being able to do, like, if we're saving X amount of dollars, being able to concretely say we've spun that into X amount of houses, going to the future. So instead of building 30 homes a year, well, now we can build 35 and then, keep going and pushing that forward. And I think this tax credit would piggyback off of what the Tennessee or THDA has done, where they have a appraisal gap financing program that is at a significantly lower number than what this tax credit would provide. So our housing agency has seen the importance of this kind of program, and we have used it to great success. It was a pilot back in 2018. It went away for a little bit, but now it's coming back. So as people are looking for case studies as to could something like this work, Tennessee could be a place where that can be seen. There's only going to be about $3 million allocated to that program this upcoming year. And again, I think I would stress that 3 million is good. It's not really enough to really turn around a lot of these neighborhoods, or at least stop the decline of them. So I think those kind of projects we would be able to do probably more infill than we would ahead of previously. But I think those would be the kind of projects and outcomes that we would be looking for.
Right. Matt, I have another one from you, and I'm gonna take some liberty and reframe this question a little, but basically, how do we know that this proposal won't actually inadvertently raise housing costs and raise housing prices? And I mean, this is really baked into the design of the policy, so that these are modest homes for owner occupancy. But can you unpack that? There's a question about putting pressure on the housing market and making it worse.
Yeah, well, I do think these are pretty modestly priced homes to begin with, because it is again capped at 4 times the median family income. So I think the design is for a market where there's such low home values that maybe it would be beneficial to get some more market comps on there. And that might be a model where you want to attract people maybe closer to 120, 130, 140% of AMI to bring up the home values in a neighborhood that right now is on the decline. So that would be one model that might not be the worst outcome in the world. But another model is you could do, and that would be what we call that's the true appraisal gap, value gap issue. But what about the affordability gap? Maybe you're a developer that wants to make the homes, and I'm sure Habitat would be in this category, where you're trying to make a home that you could easily sell to someone at 140% without any subsidy, available to somebody making 100% of AMI. And now you're using the extra subsidies to kind of support that kind of approach, where you're having the homeowner kind of be able to have it be affordable to a lower income homeowner. So that's the nice thing about the program is the flexibility. And I did see a related question that you may have also been pulling together, Sarah, about developer costs too, that a developer might inflate the cost. That's up to the HFAs. They would have to put, I think, strict caps on how much a developer fee can be in each project, like they do with the housing credit.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. Brian, quick question. I'll actually pack two together. How has this bill been scored? And also, you mentioned the timing on the reconciliation being immediate. What does Congress need to hear immediately? What are our chances? And I think we can be candid with this group here.
Sure. So it has been scored in the past. This obviously bill came close to being considered in the last reconciliation measure under the Biden administration. It's got a score of about 20 billion over 10 years. And so I think in a lot of our meetings, the good news is we rarely ever get pushback on the merits or the need, to be honest. Obviously, for some that there is a little hurdle on the score. Of course, there's large economic benefits to all of this, and so I think a number of Republican offices certainly understand that. As far as kind of the timing of all this, yeah, the time is now. I mean, the Senate is really cobbling their bill together right now, trying to kind of finalize a few items, and so we're pushing hard to include this and move this for some senators it is kind of a front burner issue, others it's a back burner, and so we're trying to move that up to the front burner. And so we've been advocating with as many folks, obviously on finance, as I said earlier, but even off the committee, that I think Chairman Crapo and Leader Thune are certainly listening to all members of their caucus.
Thanks, Brian. All right. Well, just to recap, Neighborhood Homes Investment Act is one of several, but this is a really critical policy proposal that has bipartisan support, industry support to boost homeownership supply. And we're pushing for it to be in but certainly the next tax package. And, in the last Congress, we had more than 100 bipartisan co-sponsors of the legislation. A tremendous amount of advocacy has been done to get it, even at the level of consideration it has now. So thank you to many of our partners who are on this call. We are urging everyone to reach out to, again, members, especially those on the tax committee, to include it in the reconciliation bill. It is an upward battle for these new tax credit proposals, but again, we know that this is a national need. And advocates and supporters and folks who are just still more curious, you can go to neighborhoodhomesinvestmentact.org to learn more about the proposal and the coalition and access advocacy resources. We have a one-pager, we have a bill summary, we have interactive maps, and we will also post and share the link, some folks asked, to this recording so people can share or rewatch this presentation. So with that, I want to thank all of our attendees and thank our panelists for joining us today, and we will keep doing the work. Thanks, everyone.